I remember that morning like it happened yesterday. The sunlight was soft, spilling gently through the curtains, painting the kitchen with warmth. I was sitting at the small table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, feeling the quiet settle around me like a familiar blanket. Then the doorbell rang, a sound so ordinary, but somehow, in that moment, it felt heavy with possibility. I wasn't expecting anyone. Not really. I had learned that surprises usually came in small, forgettable ways. But this felt different. My heart began to race, a mixture of hope and fear I hadn't felt in years. I opened the door slowly, and there she was, my daughter, my little girl who had been taken from me so many years ago. She looked older, of course, grown into a woman with the same eyes I remembered, the same soft smile, but carrying the weight of 2 decades. My breath caught. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She looked at me, hesitant, almost afraid, as if she weren't sure she belonged there. And yet, there she was, standing on my doorstep after 20 long years. She whispered, "Mom." It was a single word, fragile, trembling, but it carried everything: longing, hope, fear, and love that had never faded. I wanted to run to her, to hold her and never let go. I wanted to cry, to laugh, to tell her that I had thought of her every single day. But I stayed still. I let her take the first step. Finally, she moved forward. I opened my arms slowly, my hands trembling, and whispered, "Come in, come home." That moment, that first step, changed everything. After 20 years of distance, of longing and silence, our story was beginning again, and I realized, even before she entered my home, that love could endure more than time, more than separation, and more than regret. To understand the depth of that morning, I have to go back a little, to the days when she was small and the world felt full of promise. She was born when I was still very young, barely ready to be a mother. I had so many fears, so many uncertainties, but the moment I held her in my arms for the first time, it was as if the universe had given me a gift I didn't know I needed. I felt a love I had never known before, a love so overwhelming that it carried me through every sleepless night, every worry, every decision I didn't know how to make. I promised her, in that quiet hospital room, my fingers trembling as I held hers, that I would protect her, care for her, and love her without pause. I whispered those promises over and over as I cradled her in my arms, telling myself that nothing, no hardship, no challenge, could ever separate us. And for years, that promise shaped everything I did. It was the reason I got up early, worked late, and carried her laughter in my heart even during moments of exhaustion. Our home was small, cozy, and lived in. The curtains were faded but smelled faintly of baking bread, a comfort that wrapped around me every morning. In the corner of the living room, the garden spilled its flowers over the path, and I would pick them to put in tiny vases on the table. Every corner of that home held memories: mornings filled with quiet laughter over spilled cereal, the Sunday ritual of pancakes with extra syrup, bedtime stories whispered with gentle kisses on her forehead, afternoons in the park where she would run ahead of me, calling out, "Mom, watch me," and my heart would swell at the sight of her joy. I worked hard to provide for her, often taking extra shifts and stretching every coin to make her life full and comfortable. There were times of exhaustion, moments when I wanted to collapse and just rest, but her smile would be enough to keep me going. She was my heart outside my chest, the reason I found strength I didn't know I had. Every small victory of hers, learning to tie her shoes, riding a bicycle without training wheels, winning her first school award, felt like my own. I carried her pride with me as a quiet triumph in my soul. And yet, life has a way of twisting even the most carefully laid plans. Then everything changed. It was not sudden, not dramatic like a storm crashing through the house. It was subtle, slow, like a shadow stretching across our bright days, until one morning I woke and realized she was gone. The silence in the house was sharp, cutting into the corners where her laughter had once lived. Her room, once filled with stuffed animals and tiny clothes, felt hollow. The toys were still there, but they were lifeless. The echoes of her footsteps were gone. For 20 years, I carried her in my heart. I wrote letters I never sent, pouring all my love into every carefully chosen word. I wrote about my days, my longing, my hope. I poured into journals the memories of her first steps, her first words, the way she would hug me when the world seemed too big for her little body. Every birthday I quietly marked on the calendar, every milestone I missed, I remembered in secret. I never stopped hoping, never stopped dreaming of the day we would see each other again. That hope became my sustenance, a quiet flame I refused to let die. Those years were not easy. I grew older, made new friends, tried to build a life beyond the hollow ache. But there was always a space, missing a quiet, persistent ache that never left me. Nights were the hardest. I would sit by the window, the world dark and still outside, and imagine her laughter echoing in the hallway. I would remember the way she held my hand, the songs we sang together in the kitchen, the soft murmurs of "I love you, Mom," as she drifted off to sleep. Those memories were my refuge. They were mine alone, untouchable, sacred, even in the midst of daily life. Even while I worked or ran errands, she was present in my thoughts. I would catch glimpses of her in strangers, a little girl running down the street, a woman's smile, the way someone held their child's hand. I would pause, holding my breath, feeling for a moment as if she might somehow be there, just out of reach. And though those moments brought tears, they also reminded me that love does not disappear. It endures, quietly, in places unseen. I remember the first few years after she was gone as a blur of grief, prayer, and patience. Every morning, I would wake and whisper a small prayer for her, asking for her safety, her happiness, her peace. I would picture her growing up strong and kind, imagining her laughter, her struggles, her triumphs. It became a quiet ritual, my way of holding her close even when she was far away. And as the years passed, I carried not only hope but also a steady, patient acceptance that life moves forward, even when it is cruel. In those years, I met people, formed connections, made small joys. I planted flowers that I hoped she would one day see. I baked breads and cookies, imagining sharing them with her. I helped neighbors, cared for friends, extended love in ways I could manage. Each act was a quiet echo of the love I carried for her, a way of keeping my heart alive while I waited. There were difficult moments, too. Sometimes, someone would ask if I had children, and I would hesitate, a pang of sorrow striking my chest. Or I would see a mother and daughter laughing together in a store, and I would feel the hollow ache of what I had lost. But I learned to breathe through the longing, to honor it without letting it consume me. It became part of me, a bittersweet companion that shaped who I was, teaching me patience, resilience, and the depth of a mother's love. Even when she was gone, I believed she was somewhere safe, that someone loved her, and that she was living a life I could only imagine. That belief, fragile as it sometimes felt, carried me forward. I refused to let despair define me. I chose to hold on to hope, even when hope seemed distant, even when the calendar pages turned and birthdays passed, even when I met new friends or experienced new joys. I held on to the quiet conviction that one day, somehow, we would meet again. And then there were the little reminders that life is unpredictable. A letter, a phone call I never received, a fleeting glance of someone who reminded me of her. All these small signs were threads connecting me to a future I could not yet see. They taught me that love is not about possession, about control, or about always being physically present. Love is about endurance, patience, and faith. The days and years moved slowly, but I never stopped nurturing that hope. Every act of care I performed for others, every smile I offered, every connection I made, was done with the unspoken thought, one day, she might be part of this world again. And when that day came, I wanted to be ready. Even as I grew older, the hope never wavered. I planted flowers for her garden, saved small keepsakes, and maintained a home that could welcome her. I wrote letters to her in my mind, imagining the moment she would read them, imagining the laughter and tears we would share. It was a quiet, patient love, unshakable, even in the absence of evidence. And so, as the years turned into decades, I carried her memory like a precious jewel, a sacred light that never dimmed. The world moved on around me. Friends came and went, seasons changed, but I remained, holding on to the promise I had made. That first day I held her in my arms. That promise that love is patient, that it endures, was what defined me, sustained me, and prepared me for the moment when, at last, she would walk back into my life. When she arrived, it wasn't all tears and instant closeness. There was hesitation, uncertainty, a cautious space between us. She had her life now, her memories, her experiences without me, and I had mine. Sitting across from her, I felt a strange mix of joy and sorrow. It was surreal to look at the person I had loved most in the world and realized how much time had passed, how much had been lost in those 20 years. The air between us felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and memories that neither of us had dared to touch for decades. At first, we spoke about small, neutral things: the weather, the neighborhood, the flowers blooming in the yard. her job, her life in the city she had built for herself. I listened more than I spoke, savoring each word as if it were fragile glass that could shatter with the wrong touch. Every so often, I would ask gentle questions, careful not to overwhelm her. I wanted to understand, to show patience, to offer the safety and love she had missed for so long. I remember asking her about her mornings. "Do you still drink tea like you used to?" I asked one afternoon, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup. She smiled faintly, a small, tentative upturn of the lips, and nodded. "Sometimes," she said softly. That tiny answer made my chest ache and swell all at once. Something so ordinary, a cup of tea, felt like a bridge across decades. I tried to sprinkle pieces of her childhood into our conversations. I mentioned the small trinkets she had once treasured, her favorite storybooks, the games we had played in the living room. Sometimes her eyes lit up, and she remembered. A spark would flicker across her face, a recognition that made my heart leap. "I had forgotten about that," she whispered once, holding a tiny wooden horse I had found in the attic and dusted carefully before she arrived. "I loved this." I nodded, my hands trembling slightly. "I kept it for you," I said. "I couldn't let it go. Not one piece of you." Other times, there was a distant look, a quiet pause, and I felt the absence of years stretch between us like a canyon I could not cross in a single step. She would stare at the wall, her fingers tracing patterns on the table, her mind clearly elsewhere. I learned to let those silences exist, to not fill them with words that might be premature or misjudged. Patience became our first tool for connection, and I realized that even 20 years of love could not erase the time we had lost. There were moments that hurt. She shared stories of what she had been told about me, misconceptions, half-truths, stories painted to make me distant or uncaring. Sometimes she had heard that I had given up hope, that I had abandoned her. Each story struck me like a cold wind. I felt a stab in my chest each time, and I could hear the echo of my silent years, the prayers I had whispered at night, the tears I had shed, the letters I had written and never sent. And yet, I forced myself to remain calm. I tried to explain without anger, to share the truth quietly, to let my love speak for itself. I learned that insisting too strongly on the truth could feel like an attack to her. Love, I realized, had to be patient. An explanation must be gentle. Bridging a 20-year gap was delicate work, like walking carefully on stones across a deep river. One misstep could send ripples through the fragile trust that was slowly forming. Each conversation required caution, attentiveness, and a constant awareness of her emotions. I learned to listen between the lines, a pause, a soft sigh, the way her eyes lingered on a memory. These were signals I tried to honor, rather than rush past. Sometimes she would retreat into silence, folding her hands in her lap or staring out the window as if looking for someone who had not yet arrived. I could see the walls she had built around herself, tall and firm from years of absence and longing. I did not push. I simply sat beside her, offering presence, warmth, and understanding. Every quiet gesture, hand on a chair, a shared smile. The brewing of tea together was a thread reconnecting us, one small stitch at a time. I remembered how she had been as a child, cautious, thoughtful, a little shy, but filled with curiosity. She had always asked questions that made me think, that forced me to see the world through her bright, young eyes. Now, decades later, I saw traces of that same spirit, tempered by experience and guarded by the loss she had endured. And I realized that the person sitting before me was both the little girl I had known and the woman she had become, a combination that was at once familiar and completely new. Some mornings, she would come down quietly, and we would sit at the kitchen table drinking tea, the sun spilling softly across the worn wooden surface. I would watch her stir her cup, her hands steady but her eyes distant. And I would remember the mornings we had shared when she was small. "Do you remember the pancakes on Sunday?" I asked one day, almost hesitantly. She laughed softly, a delicate, musical sound, and nodded. "I do. You always burned the edges, but I loved them anyway." We smiled at each other, and for a brief moment, the years seemed to collapse, leaving just the two of us in that small kitchen, laughing over a shared memory. And yet, there were other moments when the gap between us felt insurmountable. She would talk about her life, and I would realize how much I had missed. Birthdays I had never seen, graduations I had never attended, heartbreaks I had never consoled her through. I carried the weight of those lost years silently, trying not to let it seep into the conversations we shared. I had to remind myself constantly, this was not the time for guilt. or for asking her to forgive the absence that was never truly mine to control. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I would see flashes of pain in her eyes. She had been told things, led to believe stories that hurt her deeply. "I thought you didn't want me," she said once, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my heart break again, the familiar ache of misunderstanding stretching across decades. I reached out slowly, covering her hand with mine. "No, never," I said softly. "I wanted nothing but to know you were safe. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." She would nod, sometimes smile faintly, but then retreat again into her thoughts. I understood that the path to trust was uneven, filled with pauses and setbacks. Some days were better than others. Some conversations would end with laughter and ease, and others with silence and tears. Every day, I reminded myself that this was progress, that patience, presence, and quiet understanding were the only tools I had to rebuild what had been lost. Even ordinary moments became fragile acts of connection. I would offer to make tea, and she would let me, and we would sit side by side, letting the quiet fill the space. I would watch her hands brush over the cup, or see the small way her shoulders relaxed when I shared a memory from her childhood. These were victories, small, understated, but deeply significant. Each one reminded me that the bridge between us, though delicate, was slowly being built. Some evenings, we would sit in the living room, and she would ask questions about her early years, questions that were hesitant, careful, like testing the waters of a river. "Mom, what was my favorite bedtime story?" she asked once. I smiled gently, recalling the nights we had spent reading together. "The one about the little red train," I said. "You always wanted to read it twice before bed, no matter how tired you were." She laughed softly, and for a moment, it felt as if the years of absence had been paused, if only for a heartbeat. But the reconciliation was never linear. There were days when old resentments flared, subtle but unmistakable. She would speak sharply at times, not out of anger at me personally, but frustration at the lost time, at the absence she had endured. I learned to breathe through it, to not take it personally, to offer quiet listening instead of defense. Every harsh word or frustrated sigh was a reflection of her pain, not a rejection of me. And there were moments when I faltered as well. I would feel the sharp pang of regret at all I had missed. Birthdays I had never celebrated, holidays spent alone, milestones I had to remind myself to be present, to not let grief overwhelm the fragile reconnection forming before me. I had to focus on the small victories, the shared smiles, the gentle touch of her hand, the quiet laughter at a forgotten childhood joke. Even as tension and fragility marked our days, there was also a growing warmth, a small joke, a remembered story, a shared cup of tea, a glance of recognition. All these were threads weaving us closer. Slowly, I began to see the walls around her heart soften, the hesitation in her movements diminish, and I realized that love, when patient and consistent, can endure even decades of absence, misunderstandings, and pain. The weight she carried was heavy, and I could feel it pressing down in the spaces between our words. She carried years of absence, anger, confusion, and a longing she hadn't known how to express. And I carried my own weight, the regret, the sorrow, the endless nights of wishing she was near, of imagining what might have been, of counting every missed birthday and milestone. But we had our gentle clashes, small misunderstandings that came not from malice, but from unfamiliarity and fear. I would ask her about a childhood memory, and she might flinch or change the subject. She might misinterpret a kind word, thinking it held criticism. Those moments hurt, yes, but they were necessary. They reminded me that love, like a fragile seed, takes time to grow again. I tried to balance patience with honesty. When she voiced her doubts or frustrations, I did not become defensive. I shared my truth, my heart, and my experiences without judgment. I wanted her to see that my love had never wavered, even when circumstances forced us apart. I wanted her to understand that I had carried her in my heart every single day. Slowly, we began to navigate this fragile new relationship. We shared small routines, cooking a meal together, watering plants, walking through the garden. We laughed occasionally, the sound soft and careful, like testing water before diving in. There were tears too, quiet, controlled tears, not from anger, but from the rawness of what had been lost. I remembered every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every whispered secret we had shared when she was small. I realized that love could not be demanded or rushed. I could not expect her to forgive instantly, to trust me without hesitation. Love had to be offered again, slowly, patiently, and that was exactly what I chose to do, day by day, moment by moment, until the thread connecting us grew a little stronger. Even in the silences, even in the small clashes, there was hope. There was love, still present, delicate but unbroken, and I clung to it, knowing that, slowly, very slowly, we could rebuild what time had tried to take from us. Those days passed since she first arrived, and every morning I woke with a quiet hope that today might be the day we truly began to reconnect. The hope was fragile, delicate, like a glass ornament balanced on the edge of a table. Every step we took toward each other seemed hesitant, careful, measured against the long years of distance and misunderstanding. I would watch her quietly in the mornings, noticing the way she sipped her tea, the slight furrow in her brow when she read a book or glanced out the window, and I would remind myself to move gently, not to rush the delicate process of reconnecting. One afternoon, she asked to go through some old things I had kept in the attic. I had preserved them without thinking too much about it, boxes stacked neatly, each labeled with her name and the year, containing pieces of her life I had saved like fragile treasures. Toys she had loved, drawings she had made, letters she had written to me that I had never allowed myself to read too closely for fear of opening old wounds. I hadn't touched them since she left. My fingers trembled slightly as I climbed the narrow stairs beside her, each creaking step echoing in the silent house. The attic smelled of old wood, dust, and faint traces of the lavender I had always sprinkled on the floor when she was small. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, tiny golden specks, dancing like memories suspended in the air. It felt like stepping into a time capsule, a space where decades collapsed and the years of separation became both unbearable and beautiful. The first box I opened revealed dolls with missing limbs, pencils worn down to stubs, a small sweater I had knitted decades ago that she had long outgrown, and a pair of worn shoes she had refused to part with, even when they no longer fit. Her fingers brushed over the worn edges of each object, tracing lines that time had faded. "Mom, did you really keep all of this?" she asked, her voice soft, fragile, almost like a whisper she was afraid might break the spell of the moment. "Of course," I whispered back, my own voice catching slightly. I couldn't bear to let them go. These were pieces of you, pieces of us. I felt a lump in my throat. The years of waiting, praying, longing, all of it seemed to converge in that one moment, and I was not ashamed to admit the tears that threatened to spill. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had survived decades of absence. She knelt beside me, pulling out a crumpled notebook, her fingers lightly brushing the faded handwriting she had left behind. Pages filled with scribbled drawings, short stories, and notes that captured the innocence of childhood now, decades past. Tears pooled in her eyes, and mine threatened to spill as well. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of memory settle around us. It was a quiet, sacred pause, where the air seemed to hum with the echoes of laughter, whispered secrets, and tiny, forgotten joys. We began to sort through the boxes together, carefully lifting out each object, handling it with reverence. A wooden train set she had loved, a stack of coloring books she had filled with bright, reckless strokes of crayon, her first school backpack, worn at the corners but still recognizable. I told her stories I had tucked away in my heart for years, about the times she had laughed so hard she fell off the couch, the rainy afternoons we spent making paper boats to float in puddles, the small victories she had celebrated quietly, the tiny heartbreaks she had endured as a child. Every memory felt alive again, yet shadowed by the absence of the years we had lost. She would smile softly at a story, then pause and look down, the weight of the missing years pressing on her shoulders. I noticed how careful she was with each memory, like she was holding fragile glass, afraid that the truth of our separation might shatter the fragile trust we were rebuilding. At one point, she picked up a small, frayed doll I had sewn for her when she was 5. Its stitching had loosened over the years, but it still had the same cheerful expression. "I remember you made this for me," she said, her voice quivering. "I never thought I'd see it again." I nodded, brushing a finger over the faded fabric. "I kept it because it reminded me of your laughter, of your joy, of the little moments that made life beautiful." She hugged it to her chest, and I could see the years of longing, the silent questions she had carried, slowly softening in her eyes. We uncovered a stack of her old school projects, colorful pieces of paper taped and glued together with care. "I can't believe you saved this," she said, tracing the letters of her name on a handmade card. I thought these were lost forever. I smiled, my heart swelling. Nothing that belongs to you was ever truly lost, I said. Even when you were away, I carried you with me every day. Then came a bundle of letters I had written but never sent, letters filled with love, encouragement, apologies I feared might never reach her, reflections on her milestones I had witnessed only from afar. I handed them to her gently. These are for you, if you want to read them, I said. She opened the first one carefully, as though stepping into a time machine. Her eyes flickered across the words, tears spilling quietly, and I felt my chest tighten. Mom, I had no idea, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I never knew you felt all this. I reached out and touched her shoulder. I felt it every day, I said softly. Even when I couldn't see you, even when I couldn't hold you, even when it seemed impossible, I never stopped loving you. She looked up at me then, really looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if trying to reconcile the little girl she had been with the woman sitting before her, the mother who had carried her absence like a silent weight for 20 years. Hours passed, and we continued to sift through the boxes, letting the memories guide our conversation. The attic, once silent and dusty, now felt alive with laughter and soft murmurs. We paused frequently, just sitting together, letting the presence of each other fill the empty spaces that had haunted us for decades. Each object we uncovered was a thread stitching us back together, a tangible proof that love had endured across time and distance. At one point, she held up a simple wooden picture frame, chipped at the corners, containing a photograph of us on her 5th birthday. I remember this day, she said softly. You baked that cake, and we laughed when it collapsed. I chuckled, brushing away a tear. I remember, and I would do it all again, 1,000 times over, just to see your smile. The more we explored, the more she began to ask questions, not about objects, but about feelings, about moments I had never shared. Mom, did you ever feel lonely without me? She asked quietly, as if afraid the answer might change her perception of me. I smiled gently, holding her gaze. Every day, but it was your happiness that kept me going. Your safety, your growth, your joy. I lived for those, even when I couldn't be near you. Her tears came and went in waves. Sometimes she laughed, a soft, musical sound, at the memories that were hers alone. Sometimes she sobbed quietly, mourning the years she thought she had lost. And all the while, I held her hand, letting her know without words that it was safe to feel, safe to remember, and safe to begin anew. By the time the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the dusty floor, we had gone through nearly every box. The attic was no longer just a storage space. It had become a sanctuary of shared memory, a place where the past and present merged. She sat back on the floor, clutching a small stuffed animal, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and joy. I can't believe all this was kept, she whispered. It's like you never really let me go. I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. I never did, I said softly. Not for a moment. Even when we were apart, you were always here. I placed a hand over my heart. In here. Always in here. She leaned against me, and for the first time, the years of separation felt like something we could mend. The cracks were still there, yes, but they were no longer insurmountable. And in that quiet attic, surrounded by the echoes of our shared past, we both understood that love, though tested by time, could find its way back. The memories, once fragile and distant, became the foundation of a new beginning, a turning point, where past sorrow met present healing, and hope took root again in our hearts. But, from that day onward, the attic became our place of reconnection, not just for the objects we had found, but for the conversations, the shared laughter, the gentle confessions, and the quiet presence of two hearts rediscovering each other. Every day, we climbed those stairs together, not just to revisit the past, but to reclaim a bond that had never truly been broken. Even though the journey ahead was long, and the years of absence could not be undone, that afternoon marked a beginning, a turning point where patience, presence, and enduring love had finally created a space for healing, for understanding, and for the fragile but undeniable rekindling of a mother-daughter bond that had survived to decades of distance. As we sat among the memories, she hesitated, her face uncertain. Finally, she whispered a question that struck me like lightning. Why didn't you ever try to find me? The words pressed into my chest, heavier than anything I had expected. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I couldn't, I said softly. I was told you were gone, and I had to trust that you were safe. I prayed every day that you were happy, that someone loved you, that you were cared for. I never stopped loving you." Her eyes dropped, and for a moment, the years of misunderstanding and anger seemed to radiate between us. I thought you abandoned me," she said quietly, the pain in her voice raw. "No, never," I replied, my voice trembling. "Not for a single day. Every night, I whispered your name. I imagined your laughter, your smile. I imagined holding you again. I lived every day hoping that somehow, some way, we'd meet again." There was a pause, and then, slowly, she reached for my hand. Her fingers trembled, and I held them gently, feeling the years of separation melt slightly in that simple touch. "I'm here now," I whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." That moment, fragile as it was, marked the true turning point. There were no dramatic confessions, no tears that fell uncontrollably. It was quiet, almost fragile, but it was real. The love that had been lost had begun to return. In the days that followed her return, I noticed that our relationship no longer depended on words alone. It was in the small gestures, the quiet moments, that spoke louder than any apology or explanation could. She would sometimes sit in the kitchen while I prepared tea, watching me move with practiced familiarity, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter. I would catch her gaze and offer a soft smile, and in that silent exchange, I felt a thread connecting us again, delicate but unbroken. It was in these little instances that the rebuilding began, almost imperceptibly at first. Like the first shoots of green pushing through winter soil, cooking together became a ritual of reconnection. We found ourselves in the kitchen, surrounded by the comforting smells of spices and baking bread, laughing over forgotten recipes. I showed her how I had always made her favorite pie, the crust still delicate but resilient, much like the bond we were rediscovering. "Mom, I had forgotten how much I loved this smell," she said one afternoon, inhaling deeply as we rolled dough across the counter. The corners of her eyes crinkled slightly as she smiled, and I felt a warm ache in my chest. That moment, small and ordinary, carried the weight of years lost and love unspoken. She began to tell me about her life, her triumphs, her mistakes, her fears, and the quiet victories she had celebrated alone. She spoke of late nights in the city, long hours at a job she had loved but which often left her feeling empty. She spoke of friends she had made and lost, of dreams she had chased and abandoned, of moments she had wished she could share with me but couldn't. I listened with patience, my hands folded in my lap, my heart open. I didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't ask for justifications. I simply offered my presence, absorbing the details of the daughter I had loved from afar, finally able to hear her voice and know her again. We spent evenings on the porch, wrapped in sweaters against the cool evening air. The sunsets painted the sky in soft pinks and fiery oranges, and the world outside seemed to pause, offering us a space to exist together without the intrusion of the past. One evening, she leaned her head against my shoulder, a hesitant gesture that carried years of longing. "Mom, I missed you," she whispered, her voice fragile yet full of honesty. My chest tightened, a mix of sorrow for the years lost and gratitude that she had returned. I held her hand gently, the weight of unspoken words resting between us. "I missed you too," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly, but filled with all the love I had carried through 2 decades of absence. Our conversations began to delve deeper. She asked questions I had been quietly longing to answer, questions about the choices and circumstances that had led to our separation. I spoke slowly, carefully, without anger or bitterness. I shared what I had known, what I had hoped for, and what I had feared. I explained the circumstances that had taken her away, the misunderstandings and decisions made by others, and the unrelenting hope that I carried each day. She listened, really listened, absorbing my words, not as excuses but as a window into the truth of my heart. There were moments of silence, moments heavy with emotion. Sometimes, tears would pool in her eyes, and I would place my hand over hers, offering comfort without a single word. Other times, we would laugh softly, remembering the small joys of her childhood, her favorite stories, the way she used to curl up in a blanket fort, the songs she had sung while helping me bake. These shared memories became a bridge across the 20 years, fragile yet strong, delicate yet unbreakable. We began to discover a rhythm in our renewed relationship, a language of gestures and glances. She would leave small notes in the kitchen, reminders of things we needed to do together, and I would respond with little tokens of care, a cup of tea waiting for her when she returned from errands, a blanket draped over the chair where she liked to sit. Even these small acts carried meaning, quiet affirmations that we were choosing each other again, day by day, moment by moment. One afternoon, we went through a box of photographs I had kept hidden for years. The images captured her as a child, laughing, curious, growing into herself, and each one was a reminder of both the passage of time and the constancy of my love. "Mom, I can't believe you kept all of these," she said softly, picking up a photo of her in a yellow raincoat, standing in puddles after a storm. "Every detail. You remembered everything." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Every day, I remembered you," I said quietly. "Even when I couldn't see you, I held you in my heart." As the days stretched into weeks, she began to let herself relax more fully. There were mornings when she would wake early and join me in the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of flowers as we tended to them together. She laughed at my clumsy attempts at planting tulips, and I marveled at how much of her childhood spark remained vibrant and resilient. We shared meals, stories, and even quiet chores, each act of togetherness slowly knitting our hearts back together. Sometimes, though, the weight of the past would press down, and I would see her pull away slightly, her expression clouded with doubt. I understood. 2 decades of absence cannot be erased with a single gesture, cannot be healed with words alone. I learned to be patient, to offer space when needed, and to show love not as a demand but as a constant presence. I began to understand that rebuilding a connection is not about rushing, but about being consistently present, day after day, gesture by gesture, word by word. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, she spoke words I had dreamed of hearing for 20 years. "Mom, I spent so long thinking I had lost you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "But now, I see I never did. You were always here, in my heart." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I held back the flood, letting the words settle between us, letting them sink into the corners of our hearts. "I never left you," I whispered, "not for a single moment, even when I couldn't see you, even when the world said we were apart. I carried you with me, every day." In that quiet moment, I realized the profound truth I had clung to through years of loneliness and longing. Love, even when unspoken, never disappears. It waits, it endures, and sometimes it returns in the quiet moments, in the tender glances, in the simple act of holding hands after decades apart. It returns not with fanfare, not with drama, but gently, persistently, in the ways that matter most. We began to create new memories, layering them over the old ones, blending past and present into a shared story that was ours alone. We would sit together in the evenings, sipping tea and listening to the soft hum of the world outside, talking about everything and nothing at all. She shared the moments she had longed for someone to witness, and I offered my presence, my love, my understanding, freely and without expectation. There were walks in the park, where we would pick up fallen leaves and laugh over the shapes they made. There were afternoons spent in the garden, planting flowers together, watching the small shoots push through the soil like our fragile yet growing bond. There were quiet nights when we sat side by side on the couch, her hand in mine, a blanket over our knees, and the simple comfort of being together filled the spaces that had been empty for 20 years. Even the ordinary moments became extraordinary. She would hum softly while cooking, the same tune she had hummed as a child while brushing her hair. I would listen, feeling the years melt away, the distance vanish, until only the love between us remained. It was not perfect. There were still hesitations, still moments of doubt, but it was real, it was honest, and it was enough. And slowly, piece by piece, day by day, our connection rebuilt itself. We learned to trust again, to laugh again, to simply be present for one another. There were no dramatic reconciliations, no grand gestures of apology. Instead, there were small acts of care, quiet conversations, shared memories, and tender glances that spoke volumes. I realized that the true turning point was not a single event, but a series of moments: a smile across the kitchen table, a shared memory in the attic, a hand held during a quiet evening on the porch. These moments, strung together, became the bridge across 20 years of absence, carrying us gently back to each other. By the time she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "I missed you," the weight of the past seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the warmth of renewed love. I could feel the years of sorrow and longing transforming into a quiet, resilient joy. And in that moment, I understood that love, when nurtured patiently, endures. It waits, it heals, and it returns, often when we least expect it, but always when it is needed most. From that day onward, our days were filled with gentle rediscovery. We cooked, we laughed, we shared stories, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, we became mother and daughter again. Not as we were before, there was no denying the lost years, but as two people who had survived, who had hoped, and who now had the chance to choose each other freely, without fear, without expectation, only love. And in those quiet moments, I realized that the heart's capacity for connection, for healing, is boundless. Even after 20 years of separation, love does not fade. It waits, patiently, enduring, returning in soft gestures, in quiet conversations, in the simple act of being present. And that, I knew, was the most profound gift of all. After that quiet afternoon in the attic, the atmosphere between us began to change, though very subtly at first. There was no sudden epiphany or miraculous reconciliation. Instead, it was the soft, almost imperceptible shifts, the way she lingered a little longer in the kitchen, the way she paused to look at an old toy or photograph, the quiet exchange of a smile or glance that conveyed something words could not. These small openings, these gentle gestures, were the beginnings of trust. They were fragile, yes, like dew on a morning leaf, but they shimmered with hope. We began to share simple routines together, little rituals that carried the weight of ordinary life but were extraordinary because they were shared after 20 years of absence. In the mornings, I would prepare her favorite tea, carefully steeping the leaves to just the right strength, adding the smallest pinch of sugar she liked, and then carry it out to the porch. She would already be there sometimes, sitting quietly in the wicker chair, watching the birds flit between the trees, listening to the faint rustle of leaves. We would sit in silence for a few moments, just letting the air carry us together, letting the gentle sounds of the morning wrap around us. At first, these moments were quiet and cautious. She would sip the tea slowly, as though testing whether it was safe to settle here, to be present with me, to allow herself to feel again. And I would watch her, my heart full of emotions I could not fully name: relief, gratitude, sorrow, love. I wanted to speak, to tell her everything I had felt in the 20 years we had been apart, but I held back. I learned, through these quiet mornings, that love does not always need to be declared. Sometimes, it simply needs to exist, consistently, without expectation, without pressure. We laughed together over small things, the way our old cat, who had grown slower with age, would suddenly leap into a sunbeam and stretch with perfect elegance, or the way the wind carried leaves across the lawn, tumbling them into unexpected patterns. Even the sound of her laughter, soft and sometimes hesitant, felt like a bridge across the decades. It was music I had missed, and hearing it again filled a space in my chest I had long believed could never be filled. She began to open up about her life gradually, first, in fragments, small pieces of her day, casual mentions of work or friends, then, with more depth, the struggles she had faced, the challenges she had overcome, the loneliness she had carried through years of living without me. She spoke of nights when she had wanted someone to call, someone to say, "I am here, I love you." She described the fear of rejection, the moments when she had been told she was on her own, the longing for a maternal presence that had been absent. I listened, without judgment, without offering immediate solutions. I offered quiet words of comfort, gentle acknowledgments of her pain, and the simple truth of my presence. "I hear you," I would say, or, "That must have been so hard." These words were not grand or dramatic, but they were real, grounding her in the knowledge that she was finally safe here, that she could speak without fear, and that she was loved without conditions. One afternoon, she asked to see the old photo albums I had kept tucked away on a high shelf, dusty from disuse. We brought them down together, and I watched as she carefully opened each book, fingers tracing the images of herself as a child, the way her hair had curled, the sparkle in her eyes, the small hands that had once clutched mine. She lingered on pictures I had taken secretly, images of moments she did not know I had captured: her first day of school, her 7th birthday, her first attempt at riding a bicycle without training wheels. "I didn't realize how small I was," she whispered, her voice soft and almost reverent. "I had no idea how much you loved me." I took her hand gently, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin, the slight tremor that revealed the weight of years spent apart. "I have always loved you," I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "Even when I couldn't hold you, I carried you in my heart every single day." As we turned each page together, I noticed the way her expression shifted, sometimes a soft smile, sometimes a quiet look of longing, sometimes tears that pooled in the corners of her eyes. Each photo, each memory, became a stepping stone in our slow journey back to each other. We would pause often, sharing stories behind the pictures, laughing at small missteps or forgotten quirks, and sometimes sitting in silence, letting the images and memories speak for themselves. Even our ordinary chores became moments of reconnection. Washing dishes together, sweeping the floor, tending to the garden, they were acts of cooperation that had once been effortless but now carried significance. We learned to share the space without tension, to work side by side in quiet companionship. There were moments when she would glance up at me, catching my eye, and I would see the gratitude, the slowly emerging trust, reflected in her gaze. Sometimes she would bring up moments from her past, memories that were tinged with sadness. "Do you remember the day I fell off the swing?" she asked one evening, a faint smile playing on her lips. I nodded, remembering it vividly. "I do," I said, "and I remember holding you in my arms, rocking you gently, and promising I would always be here." She reached out, touching my hand lightly. Even when I couldn't feel it, she murmured, "You were." We spoke of the years we had lost, but not in anger. There was acknowledgement, yes, but not blame. She would describe the moments when she had thought she was unloved, when she had felt invisible, and I would respond with gentle truths, carefully chosen, allowing her to see that my love had never wavered. We discussed the misunderstandings that had kept us apart, the miscommunications that had grown into walls, and the decisions that had been made for reasons I could not control. And yet, we did so not to dwell on pain but to gently place the past in its proper place, allowing the present to breathe and grow. Our days began to develop a rhythm, a quiet flow of connection. Mornings with tea and sunlight, afternoons with walks in the garden or tending to small tasks, evenings spent on the porch, listening to the soft chorus of crickets and nightbirds. Each moment, though simple, became an act of rebuilding, a stitch in the fabric of our relationship. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic reconciliations, only the quiet accumulation of trust, patience, and love. Sometimes, we would sit side by side in the living room, each of us lost in thought, or reading silently while the world moved around us. I would glance over occasionally and see her relaxed posture, her shoulders softening, her face unguarded. These small signs of comfort, the gradual letting down of walls, were victories in themselves. We even started to cook meals together, sharing old family recipes, laughing over burnt edges or forgotten ingredients, teasing gently about each other's methods. "Mom, I think the cake is supposed to rise more than this," she would say, pointing at a slightly flat loaf. I would smile, shaking my head. "Well, perhaps it just needed a little more patience. Just like us," I said. She laughed softly, and I felt warmth spread through me, a reminder that joy could be rediscovered in ordinary acts. There were quiet moments of reflection, too, when we would sit and speak of what it meant to be together again. She spoke of the longing she had carried, the moments when she had wished she could call, but couldn't. I spoke of the endless hope that had kept me going, the prayers I whispered every night, and the memories I had held close in the darkness. We shared our regrets, our sorrows, our realizations, not as reclamations, but as a way to honor the journey we had each endured. Gradually, the tension between us softened. She would rest her head on my shoulder in the evenings, a gesture that had once seemed impossible. We would share cups of tea, lingering over the warmth and the comfort of each other's company. We would watch the sky change color as the sun set, speaking little but feeling deeply, the silence between us full of understanding, acceptance, and love. And slowly, in these quiet moments, I began to see her fully again, not just as the daughter I had lost, or the woman she had become, but as a person with a heart, a history, and a need for care that I could now meet. I began to see us not only as mother and daughter, but as two people navigating the delicate work of mending a relationship that had been strained for decades. It was in the accumulation of these small, ordinary acts, the cups of tea, the shared laughter, the gentle touch of a hand, that the first threads of reconciliation took hold. Trust began to grow where hesitation had once lived. Love, patient and enduring, began to fill the spaces that had been empty for so long. We were not yet fully healed, but we were moving forward, slowly, steadily, together. And in those moments, I realized that the first part of healing after years of separation is never dramatic. It is not a sudden flood of forgiveness or a single cathartic embrace. It is the quiet, patient stitching together of two hearts through ordinary days, through consistent presence, through soft smiles, shared silences, and small acts of love. It is the gentle acknowledgement that while the past cannot be undone, the present can be created, and that is where the true power of connection lies. In the following weeks, a quiet rhythm began to settle into our lives, one built slowly, deliberately, out of the fragile threads of trust we were carefully weaving together. Every morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains and painted golden patterns on the floor, I would watch her move through the house, noting the small, familiar gestures that reminded me of the child she once was, and the adult she had become. It was a strange, beautiful mix of recognition and discovery, and each day brought something new to learn about her, and about the bond we were reconstructing from the fragments of our past. She began asking questions, sometimes gentle, sometimes probing, sometimes painfully direct. "Mom, why did things happen the way they did?" she asked one afternoon, her voice carrying the soft tremor of emotions she had long held inside. I took a deep breath before answering, because even after 20 years, the truth was delicate, and I wanted her to hear it with love, without blame. "There were mistakes," I said softly, "made by people who didn't understand, who thought they were protecting you. Decisions were taken out of my hands, and I had to trust that you were safe." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She hesitated, as if waiting for me to continue, to fill in the spaces of those lost years. "And you never came looking for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, tinged with a mixture of longing and accusation. I shook my head gently, reaching out to hold her hand. "I wanted to, every day, but I was told it wasn't safe, that someone else was taking care of you. All I could do was wait, hope, and pray. I never stopped loving you, not for a single day." There were moments when the conversation became too heavy, when tears spilled freely, and words trembled under the weight of decades of absence. Sometimes, the silence that followed was almost unbearable, thick and almost tangible, as if the air itself had remembered the years of separation and carried them between us. But even in those pauses, there was understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that the past was not something to erase, but something to accept, so that it could finally soften, instead of harden our hearts. We realized that reconciliation was not about forgetting, not about pretending that the pain never existed, or that the years lost were meaningless. It was about sharing those experiences, confronting them gently, and allowing the truth to act as a bridge rather than a barrier. It was about listening without judgment, speaking without defensiveness, and embracing the vulnerability that comes with trusting someone again after so long. Some days, the conversations were lighter, filled with memories of her childhood. We would sit together at the kitchen table, laughing over stories of her clumsy attempts at baking or the time she had tried to paint a rainbow on the walls with watercolor, leaving streaks of color I had spent hours scrubbing away. Her laughter was a balm to my soul, a sound I had imagined for years and could now hear in reality. "Mom, I remember that," she would exclaim, smiling. "I thought you'd be mad." "I was," I admitted, chuckling softly. "But I was also proud of your creativity. You were always so determined to try new things, even if the mess scared me at first." These moments of shared amusement were interwoven with the quieter, more reflective times. We began creating new memories to replace the void left by years apart. Cooking became a ritual of rediscovery. We experimented with recipes neither of us had tried before, laughing at the inevitable mistakes, and celebrating small triumphs when a dish turned out just right. Sometimes we would bake late into the evening, the warm aroma of bread or cookies filling the kitchen as we exchanged stories and confessions, building a connection one shared moment at a time. Walks in the park became another way to nurture our bond. We would stroll slowly along the familiar paths, noticing the subtle changes in the trees, the way sunlight danced through the leaves, or how the shadows shifted as the day progressed. She would talk about books she had read, movies she had loved, the people she had met, and the challenges she had faced. I would listen, offering insights when asked, but mostly cherishing the privilege of being allowed into her world, into the life she had led without me. Rainy days, which had once felt lonely and heavy, became intimate backdrops for our shared experiences. One afternoon, as raindrops tapped rhythmically against the window panes, she turned to me, her eyes wide and earnest. "Mom, I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of loving again," she said softly. "I want to make up for the years we lost." Her words pierced through me, a mix of ache and relief, sorrow and joy. I reached out and wrapped my arms around her, holding her as the rain drummed gently outside. creating a private symphony for our reconciliation. "There's no need to make up," I whispered. "We're here now, and that's enough. The years may have passed, but they can't take away what we still have." Slowly, I noticed her softening. Her laughter became more frequent, lighter, more spontaneous. Her smiles reached her eyes, and the guarded hesitation that had marked her first days with me began to fade. She began to share freely, trusting me with the minutiae of her daily life, the thoughts she had once held back, and the dreams she still harbored. In turn, I felt my own heart opening wider than it had in decades. The constant ache of separation, the quiet mourning for lost time, was gradually balanced by the warm anticipation of shared experiences ahead. I reveled in the ordinary magic of being able to offer comfort, to witness her small victories, to share in the simple joys that had once seemed mundane but were now extraordinary because we experienced them together. We also began the slow, careful process of addressing the misunderstandings and false narratives that had kept us apart. She asked about people who had influenced her life, about conversations she had overheard, and about decisions she had been told were final. I answered gently, without anger, allowing the truth to settle naturally. I shared my own regrets, acknowledging the moments when I had felt powerless, the nights I had cried alone, the wishes I had whispered into the dark hoping that she would somehow be safe and happy. The act of speaking these truths aloud, of sharing the pain without defensiveness, became a healing balm for both of us. It allowed us to release the accumulated weight of 20 years' worth of questions, doubts, and hurt feelings. We began to understand each other in ways that were impossible in the first days of her return. Each conversation became a stepping stone, each act of vulnerability, a stitch repairing the fabric of our relationship. Sometimes, we would simply sit in quiet companionship, side by side, letting the presence of one another speak volumes. We would watch the wind stir the trees, the sunlight drift across the walls, the shadows lengthen in the late afternoon. Words were not always needed, just being together. Breathing in the same air, sharing the same space, was enough to nurture the fragile, newly forming trust between us. Even the smallest gestures became profound. A cup of tea placed gently on the table, a hand resting lightly on a shoulder, the brushing of her hair from her face, the gentle encouragement as she recounted a difficult day. All these moments became part of a new language, the language of healing hearts. We learned to appreciate each other in ways we had never taken the time to do before. Through it all, I discovered that the true nature of love is not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It is in the quiet constancy, the patient listening, the gentle support, the shared laughter, and the tears wiped away with a soft hand. Love had endured, even during the years of separation, and now it was flowering once again, in a form both familiar and new. By the time the weeks had passed, we had begun to build a foundation that was strong yet gentle. The past was acknowledged but did not dominate. The present was shared and celebrated. The future stretched before us, full of possibility. We no longer felt the heavy weight of the lost decades as a barrier, but rather as a context that enriched our understanding, deepened our empathy, and strengthened our commitment to each other. I realized that healing old wounds is not a single moment of forgiveness or revelation. It is a continual process. It happens in shared laughter and quiet tears, in honest conversations and patient listening, in ordinary days made extraordinary by the act of rebuilding a connection that had once been severed. And in this process, both giver and receiver of love are transformed, renewed by the gentle, enduring power of patience, presence, and cared. By the end of those weeks, I could see the light in her eyes, the spark of trust, of hope, of love cautiously returned. She would laugh openly, share freely, and rest against me without fear. And I, too, felt lighter, freer, and more at peace than I had in years. The ache of the lost time remained, like a soft echo, but it no longer defined us. Instead, it reminded us of the resilience of our hearts, the patience of love, and the possibility of rebuilding, brick by brick, day by day. Through this journey, I learned something profound. It is not the years of separation that define the strength of love, but the willingness to open oneself fully to the possibility of connection, no matter how long the wait. Love is patient, enduring, and resilient. It does not demand or control, it waits. It heals quietly, steadily, and returns with a force that is gentle, yet profound. And in these weeks of healing, laughter, conversation, and quiet presence, we began to write the next chapters of our lives together. Chapters filled not with regrets, but with understanding, gratitude, and hope. Every shared meal, every soft-spoken word, every glance of affection, every laugh echoed with the promise that the bond we had nurtured for decades could not only survive but thrive. The shadows of the past had begun to lift, replaced by a warm glow of renewed connection. The lost years, though still present in memory, had become the fertile ground from which our restored relationship could grow. And in the gentle unfolding of this new rhythm, we found something extraordinary. The knowledge that even when life takes away, it can also return, offering the chance to heal, rebuild, and love more deeply than ever before. Months passed, and slowly, a new rhythm began to settle into our lives. At first, it was fragile, like the tentative first shoots of spring emerging through winter frost. We were no longer the mother and daughter who had been separated by years of misunderstanding, absence, and silence. We were two people learning to navigate each other again, learning how to walk together in the present while carrying the past carefully, without letting its weight crush us. Each morning, the house seemed lighter, the sun filtering through the curtains felt warmer, more welcoming, and the familiar smells of baking bread or the faint perfume of the garden flowers carried a sense of home that had been hollow for so long. We would greet each other with quiet smiles, sometimes simple nods, sometimes the softest touches of a hand on a shoulder. Words were no longer necessary for connection. They had begun to exist as small gestures, the unspoken language of hearts learning to trust again. She began introducing me to her friends, those young adults who had grown up in her life without me. I watched her carefully, noticing the way she navigated her world independently, confidently, yet with a vulnerability that reminded me of the child she had once been. I met the friends she had described in stories and letters, people she had relied on for support in moments I could not have been there. Their warmth toward me surprised me at first, but I soon realized it was because they could see the bond we were rebuilding, the love that had never truly faded, only paused. She shared her life openly, the joys she had celebrated, the struggles she had faced, the quiet heartbreaks that had gone unnoticed. I listened intently, offering gentle guidance only when asked, or soft encouragement when it felt natural. I did not attempt to rewrite her story or impose my perspective. Instead, I provided a quiet presence, a steady anchor she could count on. The liberation I felt in this was unexpected. For decades, I had tried to hold on to someone who was far away, carrying my longing like a weight. Now, she was here, and I realized that all I needed to do was show up with patience, kindness, and an open heart. Life slowly unfolded in ordinary, beautiful ways. Mornings were filled with laughter over breakfast. She would tease me about adding too much sugar to the tea, and I would scold her playfully for rearranging the chairs in the kitchen. We learned each other's rhythms again. Even mundane tasks became acts of connection. We would fold laundry together, share stories about the colors and fabrics, laugh at old stains that brought back forgotten memories. We would sweep the floors side by side, talking quietly about the day, or sometimes saying nothing at all, just enjoying the silent companionship that comes from years of love. And now, a gentle restoration of trust. Evenings were a time of reflection. We often sat on the porch, watching the sky change color as the sun dipped toward the horizon. There was a soft hush in the air, the kind of quiet that makes hearts open without words. Sometimes she would rest her head on my shoulder, and I would feel the steady warmth of her presence, a sensation that had been absent from my life for too long. Those evenings carried a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes only after storms have passed and the clouds have parted enough to let the light through. We began creating new traditions together, small and meaningful. Every Sunday, we would bake something together, choosing recipes that reminded us of the past and experimenting with new ones. We would sip tea while the dough rose, talking about books, sharing memories, and even playing with the cat as it wandered lazily around the kitchen. These moments were unremarkable to an outsider, but to us, they were extraordinary, a reminder that life could still be joyful, even after decades of separation. Some days, we would take long walks in the garden or the nearby park. She would point out flowers, birds, or insects, and we would share little facts we knew about them. We laughed at the clumsy movements of squirrels or the way the wind would scatter fallen leaves across the path. These walks were more than exercise. They were acts of bonding, opportunities to observe the world together and slowly rebuild the intimacy that had been missing for so long. We also spent hours revisiting old photo albums, carefully opening the pages that held memories of her childhood. She would trace the outlines of her younger self, smiling at the innocence captured in the photographs, or pause at a picture that evoked a memory long forgotten. "Mom, "I never realized how much you must have sacrificed for me," she whispered one day, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and sadness. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I would have done anything for you," I said, "even if it meant standing alone, waiting, hoping, and loving you from afar." Tears came, sometimes not dramatic or sudden, but gentle, like morning dew gathering on the edges of leaves. We would share them quietly, holding each other, acknowledging the years of absence and the ache that remained. And yet, even in those moments, there was gratitude, gratefulness for the opportunity to rebuild, for the second chance we had been given, for the love that had waited patiently for the right time to return. We had conversations about her life, the choices she had made, the challenges she had faced, and the dreams she still held. I listened without judgment, offering support where I could, guidance when asked, and always, my unconditional love. She began to ask me about my life, too, about the years I had spent missing her, the quiet hopes I had held, the small victories and sorrows that had come in my absence. These exchanges were tender, sometimes heavy with emotion, but always sincere. There were moments of reflection as well. We would sit in silence on the porch, watching the evening sky shift from gold to pink to deep indigo. Sometimes we spoke softly about the past, acknowledging the loss, the mistakes, and the misunderstandings. Sometimes we laughed at the absurdity of human life and how small misunderstandings can grow into walls that separate hearts. And sometimes we just sat, allowing our presence to speak louder than any words could, feeling the slow but steady reconstruction of our bond. Through all of this, I learned a valuable lesson. Love does not demand, does not control, and does not insist. It simply exists, patiently, enduring quietly until it can be received. I had spent years worrying, wondering, regretting, and yet, all that time, love had persisted, waiting silently for the moment when it could be shared again. She began to trust me fully in small ways, leaving notes or sharing details of her day, allowing me glimpses into her life that once had been closed to me. I learned to step back, to let her make decisions, to allow her autonomy and independence. This was a different kind of love, one that required patience, humility, and restraint. It was liberating. I realized that love, when truly patient, allows freedom. It does not suffocate or bind, it supports, nurtures, and grows quietly. Our relationship became a delicate balance between the past and the present. We remembered the years we had lost, honoring them but not letting them define us. We created new memories intentionally, moments filled with laughter, shared meals, quiet walks, and soft-spoken conversations that reaffirmed the bond we had always carried in our hearts. Slowly, the ache of the missing years softened, replaced by a gentle warmth of connection, the comfort of shared presence, and the deep, unwavering knowledge that we would not be separated again. I realized finally that life does not undo the past. It cannot erase the years of absence or the moments lost, but it offers the opportunity to rebuild, brick by brick, day by day, with patience, kindness, and presence. The love that had waited for 2 decades now flowed freely between us, richer for the endurance and resilience it had required. We could not reclaim the years we had lost, but we could create decades ahead filled with understanding, laughter, shared experiences, and deep connection. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, we would sit quietly on the porch. She would rest her head on my shoulder, and I would feel the steady warmth of her presence, a reassurance that the bond we were rebuilding was strong. The ache of the years lost remained, a quiet shadow in the background, but it was now accompanied by gratitude, hope, and a gentle pride in the love that had endured. I had spent decades fearing loss, fearing rejection, fearing that life had taken from me the greatest joy I had ever known. Yet now, I understood something profound. Love is patient. Love endures. Love waits silently for the right time to return. And when it does, it arrives not as a storm, but as a steady, warm presence that fills every corner of the heart. And in that knowledge, I discovered a quiet joy that no one can take away, a calm pride in the resilience of the human heart, a deep reassurance that even when life separates us from those we hold dear, it can also bring them back in ways more beautiful than we ever imagined. Every moment we shared, every cup of tea, every soft glance, every laugh, every quiet tear, became a testament to the enduring power of love, a love that could survive absence, misunderstanding, and time, and still bloom anew. Our lives, once fractured, were now being stitched together slowly, patiently, one ordinary day at a time. And perhaps that is the truest lesson of all, that love, when allowed to be patient, when nurtured with care and understanding, has the power to heal, to restore, and to create a future more meaningful than any past loss could diminish. The days grew quieter after our reunion, yet fuller in ways I had not expected. There was no rush, no grand declarations, just the steady rhythm of life slowly stitching our bond back together. I watched her move through her days, and I marveled at how resilience can shape a person. Even through years of absence, I thought often of the years we had lost, the birthdays missed, the nights spent apart, the quiet moments that were never shared. There was sadness, yes, a deep ache, but there was also understanding. Life had taken us down separate paths, each of us learning lessons, each of us carrying wounds. And yet, here we were, together again, one morning. As the sun poured through the kitchen window, I brewed tea for both of us. We sat in comfortable silence, listening to the soft hum of the world waking around us. I realized that love does not always come in the way we expect. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it must be rediscovered, and sometimes it returns with a quiet power that feels even more precious than before. I shared with her small stories of her childhood, things I had tucked away in memory for decades. She listened with wide eyes, laughing softly at the forgotten details, crying quietly at the tender moments she had never known. And in that sharing, I felt our hearts meet in a way that was stronger than the years of absence. It was in those simple mornings, quiet afternoons, and soft evenings together that I understood the real lesson of our journey. Love endures. It may bend, stretch, and sometimes be hidden, but it never truly disappears. Even when life takes away what we hold dear, it can also return in unexpected ways. I no longer measured my worth by time lost or regrets held. I measured it by the love I gave, the patience I practiced, and the quiet hope I carried. And now, as I sat beside my daughter, holding her hand, I knew that our bond was renewed, not by words alone, but by presence, care, and a willingness to begin again. Sometimes, I would look back on the empty spaces of the past not with anger, not with longing, but with gratitude for the lessons learned. The years apart had taught both of us patience, forgiveness, and the strength to open our hearts when it mattered most. And for that, I felt a deep, gentle joy. Evenings were the most tender. We would sit by the window, sharing tea, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue, the world quieting around us. Occasionally, we did not speak. Sometimes, that silence was enough. It held all the words we had lost, all the apologies we had never said, all the love we had always carried. On one particularly calm evening, she rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she said softly, "I never want to let this distance grow again. I want us to be part of each other's lives fully, from now on." I held her closer, feeling the warmth of her trust, the weight of her sincerity. "Neither do I, my dear," I whispered. "Neither do I." And in that moment, I understood something profound. Life may take away what we think we cannot live without, but it also gives us the chance to rebuild, to reclaim, and to rediscover the beauty of love. Sometimes, we just have to wait, to be patient, and to open our hearts when the right time comes. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The past was not forgotten, but it no longer held me captive. The present was ours, fragile but real, and the future, though unknown, was filled with possibilities we could shape together, hand in hand. I realized then that the story of our lives is never just one of loss or regret. It is a story of endurance, of patience, and of the quiet miracles that happen when we choose to love, forgive, and remain open to the unexpected joys life may bring. And so, with the soft twilight around us, I whispered a silent promise to myself and to her. I would cherish these moments, honor the journey that brought us here, and never forget the profound truth that love, in its quiet, patient way, always finds its way back. We sat there for a long time, letting the silence speak, letting the warmth settle in our hearts. The years apart had taught us much, but the years ahead, filled with connection, understanding, and gentle laughter, would teach us even more. And in that calm, quiet realization, I found hope, peace, and a love that would endure far beyond the boundaries of time.